Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Golden, and I am a project manager at Dovetail Partners and will be helping to facilitate this webinar. Welcome to our webinar, Forestry at the Dinner Table. Now, before we begin, I want to remind you all to register for our next webinar on June 12th by scanning the QR code that's on the slide or using the link in the chat. The registration links for the Q3 and Q4 webinars will be posted in our newsletter, on social media, and on our website. At the end of this webinar, we will have a Q&A session, so please submit any questions in the QA box as we go along. We also have one short polling question using Slido. You can access Slido by scanning the QR code on the screen or by using the link in the chat. Your response will be anonymous unless you choose to include your name in Slido. Our polling question for today is, what is the most challenging misconception that you encounter when talking to people about forests? I'll say it one more time. What is the most challenging misconception that you encounter when talking to people about forests? Go ahead and submit your response. We are going to return to your responses later on in the discussion. So a little bit about us and our panelists today. Dovetail Partners is a nonprofit organization that provides authoritative information on the impacts of environmental decisions. We're joined today by guest speakers Jena Thompson of the Ocelot Company, Alejo Barbero of BN Strategic Communications, and Dovetail staff Catherine Fernholz, Eliza Meyer, and Michael Snyder. Jena Thompson is the founder and CEO of the Ocelot Company, leadership and career coach, storyteller, and environmental leader. Jena focuses on helping people create sustainable impact in their careers and lives. Alejo Barbero is the founder and CEO of BN Strategic Communications. Alejo partners with leaders in the natural resources sector to navigate regulatory pressure, public scrutiny, and shifting markets, turning their vision into narratives that move people and accelerate progress. Michael Snyder is owner and principal of Green Fire Enterprises, consulting and advising in forests, forestry, outdoor recreation, and strategic communications. Previously, he served for 12 years as Commissioner of Vermont's Department of Forests, Parks, and Recreation and Vermont State Forester. Catherine Fernholz is a forester by training with over 25 years of experience in the forest and forest products sector. Her career has focused on sustainability concerns, including leadership on family forestry, community-based decision-making, forest certification, and environmental standard setting. Eliza Meyer is Executive Director at Dovetail Partners, where she supports research, communications, and program coordination focused on forest, fire, social sustainability, and responsible land use. Thank you all for joining us today. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Katie to get us started.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Maria. We're excited to have this conversation with our guest speakers today. So thank you for getting us started, Maria. Jena and Alejo, I am excited to have you here today and to explore this topic today around communications, forestry at the dinner table, as we've called it. Maria's provided a little bit of background about both of you, but I'd really like to start with you telling us a little bit more about your work. Also want to hear a little bit more from you as well, Mike. But a little bit about your work, maybe a story that sheds some light on what motivates your work, and even some reactions you have to the title of this webinar. So please, Jena, would you get us started?
Thanks so much, Katie. And it's so wonderful to be here with you all. Thanks, Eliza, for getting us started, and Maria for all of your assistance. Amy, Alejo, Mike, it's so good to see you all this morning. Um, so I got really lucky in the parent category. I was raised on wildlife refuges in the United States. My dad was a biologist, my mom was a writer. And one of my very favorite places ever to live was at the very tip of South Texas, right on the border of Mexico and the Gulf of Mexico, at a national wildlife refuge called Laguna Atascosa. Means muddy lagoon. And it is maybe 50,000 acres of thorn scrub forest, wetlands, and an incredible place where they have roseate spoonbill. So kind of looks like a flamingo, but with a giant spoonbill that eats the shrimp. Javelina, which looks a little bit like maybe a pig and a porcupine. But they had two endangered cats. The one of those cats was an ocelot. And the ocelots were maybe a little bit bigger than a house cat. They're nocturnal. and they're extremely rare. They are endangered. There are maybe 50 cats remaining in the United States when I was living there. And today their population ranges somewhere between sort of 13 to 30, at least in this Texas location. And these cats were absolutely incredible, but they really brought folks together. And when you think about large scale land use and restoration and habitat, oftentimes what we saw was that, at least with the federal government and the ranchers and the farmers around those lands, they didn't really want the feds on their lands telling them what to do, how to ranch, how to farm, except when they had this cat. And when the farmers or the ranchers would find out that there, in fact, was an ocelot denning on their site or working through their site, they were so proud. And they would do anything that they could to make sure that those habitat corridors for the cat were right on spot. And so that's what I've gotten to do, sort of with my career and my life, is finding something that is rare, that is beautiful, that brings people together in partnerships. Today they have Ocelot Conservation Day. It's coming up here in March, usually in South Texas. The entire community comes together for these giant runs. There is a mascot now of an ocelot that joins in the run. They partner with the local zoo and draw tens of thousands of visitors, all in support of this cat. So I got very, very lucky, and I'm really focused now on trying to be able to provide the kind of consulting and the kind of coaching that helps the leaders that we love, that we know so well, really bring other folks together and be able to tell their stories authentically. And when you asked about the name of this webinar, I was even thinking about, this, it's so challenging with the even the kitchen table. It's hard to talk about what we do, right? It's hard to be able to talk about what we do authentically. And yet, when you tell someone you work in conservation or you work in forestry or you work in water, or you work with nature, folks' eyes light up, right? And they will tell you about a time when they felt the most connected to nature. Or if they're very stressed, they'll tell you about how that stress is really eased by being outside, by taking a walk. And we certainly know that it doesn't have to be pristine in order for us to get those benefits. So maybe we're talking about having this at the grocery store, or having this at yoga, or having this as we're attending our children's sporting events. But certainly it's really important to be able to talk to people about what we do so that we can bring them along. Alejo, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. My name is Alejo Barbero. I am a 25-year veteran in the industry. And today I am the owner of BN Strategic Communications, where we help leaders that have visions and goals and strategies connect with the audiences that need to believe in them. What moves me, I think I got two stories. One is when I was a young sibling in my career, 2-3 years into the industry, a senior executive made it a point to make sure we understood that being on the paper was a bad thing, that being on the spotlight was a bad thing. And it came often in discussion that, the short was like, well, and you don't want to be on the paper. And so fast forward 20 some years to early this week, where I'm calling you from Argentina today, and I'm visiting friends and family here, and I'm having dinner with my friend Sergio, whom I haven't seen in 10, 15 years. And, we're just chatting about catching up things we do. And, our work comes in conversation, and he's surprised that we as a sector, we replant after we harvest. And so those two seemingly disconnected stories, 22 decades apart, are connected by silence. I think we were preconditioned as a sector that, the staying out of the spotlight was a good thing. And we build a vacuum, and the vacuum gets filled with, misconceptions and half truth and assumptions. And I think it's unfair, quite frankly, because we have such a good story to tell as a sector. You have really good people, very passionate about what they do, doing great things, and yet we're misunderstood and sometimes doubted. So that's what moves me. That's why I do what I do. That's what BN does, is just help fill that vacuum between this and that. And I think that's the opportunity that we have together. How do we empower people today and in the future to be more vocal? How do we have more voices talking about what we do? And I think that the title of the webinar, it speaks to my heart, because the conversation at the dinner table with my family, it's sacred. We just make it a point that that's what we do that's what I did when I was a kid. That's my culture. That's what we want to instill to our kids, my wife and I. And it's sacred, and it's really through those conversations with people we trust that we build opinions, we build perspectives. Well, before I read the one paper about the forestry industry, before I read the technical paper, the lens that I use is the one that I gain in that dining table or the church or the supermarket. So I think that's why these are so important, and excited to be here.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, Jena, I appreciate now knowing the backstory to the name of your company. And yes, conversations with friends and family are sacred, Alejo. I think that language resonates with me. Mike, would you share a little bit of your experience around communications? I know much of your career was public sector, but that's not all of it. But what are your thoughts to get us started, Mike?
Sure. Thanks, Katie, and everyone. I'm so very happy to be part of this conversation about conversations about forestry. Um, I'm, at the sort of tail end, the late stage of 40 years in forestry and conservation. And it's been a long and good ride, spanning forest science, forest management, and a big chunk of time in forest policy, which at its best tries to combine those prior two, science and management. And here I am at this point, find myself being reflective about that past and looking forward and what it all might mean and how to share it forward and all. And one thing I think I've noticed over the years is that many of the most meaningful and impactful conversations about forestry indeed happen outside of formal settings. They happen over coffee or a beer, certainly a walk in the woods, and yes, around the kitchen table. These sometimes allow a little bit more freedoms, a little safety, for more honesty than those more formal settings. And so I would say this is indeed a really great topic for our webinar, is, talking forestry around the kitchen table, because that's, again, where maybe some of the most impactful conversations can have, where people listen to each other, find common ground, path forward. So I'm really happy to be part of this. I have a few thoughts to share, but I'm mostly eager to be hearing from everyone else in this about this important topic. When I started out as a forester, of course, I thought the job was mostly about trees, right? Stocking guides and silviculture and stand dynamics, and my true passion, forest ecology. But over time, especially in public service, I came to understand that forestry is fundamentally a communications profession, at least as much as it is a biological one. For example, and being able to sort of communicate is the key. As a field forester, if I couldn't clearly explain a silvicultural treatment that made sense to a landowner, then it didn't matter. We weren't going anywhere with it, especially a landowner who might be unfamiliar, and there are more and more of them. Then later, as a commissioner and state forester, I learned that public forestry, and some of this I learned the hard way, public forestry rises or falls on trust. And that trust is built through transparency, explaining trade-offs honestly, inviting people into the conversation and into complexity, and certainly resisting the urge to hide behind my well-earned professional jargon. So I'd summarize by saying forests include people. it's a touchstone for me. And so accordingly, forestry must include conversation with people. And in the public sector, especially, I'd say communication isn't a side skill, it's core infrastructure. Um, uh, Silviculture, is dear to me, and it's a powerful way to shape stands. It strikes me that communication shapes whether society will allow us to practice silviculture. So again, thrilled to be here. Though a couple of thoughts from me. I'll be back for more, but I'm listening intently and thanking everyone for their participation and interest here. I'll hand it back over to you, Katie.
Thank you, Mike. And I see somebody's already put in the Q&A a shout out about your wonderful book, Woods Wise. And so we do want to
Thank you for that.
yes, exactly. We can put that in the chat so people know that your reflections on your career have at least some things have been captured in a book. So thank you, Mike. I'll also share, to your point, Mike, these, and as you've all said, these conversations happen in many places. One of the conversations around my work that I've carried with me for many years, I think it happened way back in about 2004, standing in line to go through security at the airport. Of all the places to have small talk with people, and the person standing next to me, we got into a conversation. Person asked me what I did. I said, "Oh, I work in forestry." And the first words out of that person's mouth were, "Thank you." So I've always carried that with me. That was the most elegant response I've ever heard in my career. Thank you. And then that person went on to tell me a story of other people that they had worked with in forestry and the positive experience they'd had. But when I said I work in forestry, the first thing I heard was thank you. And like I said, I've carried that with me. I think that gives me confidence sometimes when I'm scared to answer the question of what I do and what the response might be. Well, I wanted to transition into a bit of an opportunity to even give feedback to Dovetail, but I think this might apply more broadly. But at Dovetail, our mission is to be a trusted source of environmental information. Much of our communications over the 20 plus years, 22 years that Dovetail has leaned into that mission, much of our communications has been around our report. We have the report library at our website, 200, 300 reports now after 22 some years. We've provided data, information, technical insight to inform environmental decision making, looking at certification standards, life cycle assessment, some of these complex but important aspects of sustainability and of forest management. But certainly within Dovetail, we know that just delivering the facts isn't everything we need to be doing around communications and to really live up to our goal of well-informed environmental decision making, because just delivering information isn't enough for people to take action and necessarily to move forward. So what else, for Dovetail and for others in the sector that really are comfortable in that information sharing lane, what is it, what else should we be considering? Where do good communications start, or how do we leverage from that? What are the basics? I'd even be so blunt as how do we avoid getting caught up in our own brilliance, right? Our own expertise and on our soapbox. So I think, Alejo, did you want to start on this one, please?
Sure, happy to do it. I think it's a great question. And I think it's just human nature. I was talking about a vacuum before. I think it's just human nature to want to fill the vacuum with data. We think data is undisputable. So let me give you facts and charts and stuff. And I think it's part of a good conversation. But I think from my perspective, my experience, I think effective conversation comes down to three things. One is about meeting your audience where they are, which is about understanding. And to do that, you gotta be curious. You gotta listen with intent. You gotta ask questions. I think it's Covey that says, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And so if we miss this step, it's gonna be a monologue, and we're gonna talk past each other. And so understanding where people are and meeting them where they are, that's just the number one. That's the second one is, to your point about data, I think it's a combination of using data and emotion. It's about talking to the brain and talking to the heart. Just imagine if you go to the movie theater And for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, all you see is just numbers popping on the screen. How long will you stay? No one goes to the movie theater just for the numbers. Okay, so I think the combination of both, data gives information. The stories, it would help you understand and form a perspective as to what is important, why things are important. So combining the two. And then the last one, which goes back to the discussion about the dining table, is the humanizing aspect of it, which is about trust. People connect with people. You trust people well before you will trust an institution. We all read the reviews in Amazon well before we read the company's perspective on whatever product it is you're buying. And so I think it's about humanizing it. And a couple of years ago, we were doing a video series. It was about storytelling. That was our thing, was storytelling for the industry. And so we were doing a video series, and it was not an experiment, but we just learned quickly that having a forester explain planning to the audience was far more powerful than having a senior executive telling you, okay, we'll replant and we do this and we do that. So, it's just humanizing it, having that one person teaming. So now you're putting a name and a face. Jane is the one planning those trees. It's not corporation doing this. And so it's just that human factor, that trust, it's key. And so understanding, helping with interpretation, and building trust. Those three are key for an effective communication. So I think good communication, data is a part of the good communication, but it doesn't start with that. I think it starts with understanding people.
Excellent. Yeah, I appreciate that. The human connection and getting the person in the field, the authentic practitioner, into those conversations. Jena, I know that you have a way you want to approach this with a little bit of exercise. You want to take us through that?
Yeah, and I'll do my best to complement to Alejo's points as well. We're going to take maybe 10 minutes or so and actually practice some communication. And Eliza has very bravely offered to be part of this practice. And I might even ask each of the webinar members to come off mute at one point and just cheer her on with me. So, Eliza, uh, Alejo mentioned listening, and I'm curious, when he was just describing more effective ways of communications or tips, like what do you remember from his story?
Yeah, thanks, Jena. I think just thinking about listening and meeting people where you are, the thing that comes to mind for me is these conversations I've had with people in my life in a canoe. We talk about forestry at the dinner table or the kitchen table. For me, it's forestry in a canoe. I live in Minnesota, and so that's where our summers are spent. And I just loved what he said, the kind of the three things which he so beautifully laid out about meeting the audience where you are and listening. And then kind of taking you through, how do you actually do that? You really listen and you really understand where someone's coming from. And then how do you explain your point of view? When he said, his second and third points about data and emotion and trust, that really resonated with me. Of, you really have to understand where someone's coming from first, and understand what your relationship is with them. And then you can get into the point of, okay, well, what are the facts and how do those facts intersect with the things that you really care about? But I think that that's the thing that comes to mind for me when we talk about communication. What I really heard is you have to understand what's important to someone first before you understand what facts might even be relevant to them, or what might they care about.
Yeah.
You can tell someone facts all day long, but if they don't care about what those facts have to say, it's not going to get you anywhere.
Yeah. The training that I underwent as a coach talked a little bit about there being three levels of listening, right? That first level of listening is a little bit subsurface, like a little, on the surface, and it's often very much like me, right? So I'm listening to you. The very first thing that I hear is you're like, oh, I live in Minnesota and I have a canoe. My very first thought was like, I wonder what I would do in a canoe, right? Like I stop listening to you, it goes right back to me, and it's so human, right? It's very common. What did you have for breakfast this morning, Eliza?
I'm sad to say I haven't had breakfast yet. I have a cup of coffee that I've had, and I think after this I'll have maybe yogurt, but yeah,
Yeah.
nothing.
So she had coffee. I have my coffee here. I didn't have breakfast either. It's really early in California, right? Like our brains start going on and we tune out this most human connection that Alejo was mentioning when we stay in level one listening. So it's super common, but it doesn't build the connections that we need to be able to, especially when we're talking about forestry. Level two listening. Level two listening is a deeper listening. It's the listening I hope that I do with my son. But level two listening, you might notice that you're kind of mirroring someone's motions, right? If you are looking in and you're sitting together, you might notice when someone leans in. They lean back, they cross their hands, you might also do it. They tilt their head, you tilt your head. That mirroring isn't a mocking, it's just a deeper way of building connection. You're really looking in their eyes and you are connected to their story. Level two listening can be sometimes where you watch a person say something and their eyes get a tiny bit misty, and all of a sudden your nose might kind of like start to, like you can just feel that connection. So level two listening is where we want to hang out a little bit more. And when we can, those connections are very deep. Level three listening is when we're listening with our intuition. Level three listening is when we walk into a conference room and there are two or three people in there and we think, uh-oh, they just had a disagreement, right? I just walked in on something a little bit conflicty. When you walk into an elevator space and you realize that two people have chemistry and you're like, oh, great. Oh, or when you're in a professional or a personal environment and your spidey senses tingle and you think, I don't feel super safe here, right? Like, I am not sure that this is a conversation in which I want to participate. Level three listening is when we get to listen with all of our senses, all of our instincts. And our goal is just to be able to recognize, hey, I'm in level one right now. I do want to connect with this person. Let me see if I can just hang out in level two a little bit longer. But it's really natural to go in between each one of them. So I am going to try to use my level twos with you. And I'm going to ask you to think about for a second just something that you're super proud of in your life or in your career related to forests. A time when you had an interaction with someone or you did something hard that you were really proud of in your career around forests. And I just want you to maybe take 90 seconds or so and share that with us.
Yeah. I think I'll actually tell the same story that I told when you and I did a similar exercise a few months ago on a different call. But a while back, Dovetail had funding through the U.S. Forest Service through their Community Navigators program, assisting communities to get federal grant funding. Um, and one of the things that I did through that I was really proud of was I assisted a couple of different fire, like really small volunteer fire departments in Minnesota to get slip-on tanker grants, which are like grants to outfit their trucks to be mobile wildfire fighting units. And it was this really interesting exercise in like working with people who have full-time jobs. They're already, spending a ton of time for their community volunteering, and they have absolutely no idea where to start with the federal grants process, which is just, mind-numbing for the best of us and, really challenging to figure out how to decipher these things. And so it took a lot of back and forth communication with them to navigate these processes, to get them all registered in the places that they need to be registered. I was on the phone with these fire chiefs and their wives as we were trying to figure out the technology. And it took some patience in one hand, but it also was really rewarding. And I remember it was the evening I was out on a bike ride and stopped and looked at my phone and got this email that both of the departments that I'd work with had gotten these grants that we'd really worked really hard to get for them. And I think I let out a cheer. I was so excited. Um, and it was this moment of like really seeing a process pay off. You never know when you submit a grant application how it's going to go. And they were so excited and I think really proud of what they'd done because it was way outside of their comfort zone. I was feeling really pleased. And so that like I remember this moment of having this cheer on the side of the road. Um, and that has stuck with me.
Eliza, you are so brilliant. And I'm going to ask our panel to come off and you are going to yell at her. You are so brilliant. Okay, one, two, three.
You are
You
You
so
are
are so
so
brilliant.
brilliant.
So what do we notice when we hear this story, right? Like the emotion that comes up in us when I think about like being able to jump off the bike, right? And get that actual woot, the real cheer. Also, this moment of being deeply proud of our own accomplishments, and then knowing that these fire teams and their partners are also deeply proud because we've done something we didn't think we could do. We didn't know if we had time to do, and we don't always connect forests and fires. Like, why would you be out there from a forestry organization going to help these, fire departments make sure that they have enough of the tech that they need for their vehicles and for their trucks? And we're like, well, we do this because we are deeply connected to the communities, because forest and fire are very well connected to each other. And we might miss that if we don't talk about the human level. So level one listening, level two listening, level three listening. But what I also heard you do, and what Alejo had mentioned, was you connected the audience, right? And the data. Hey, these fire teams absolutely need this particular thing. And for even your grant, you had to be able to connect the need, the audience, and then the benefit, right? We are going to actually decrease risk for these communities if they have what they need. That will protect and create healthier forests. And when we create and protect healthier forests, we're also creating and protecting healthier communities. So being able to tie your need to the data, to the audience, is exactly what you've done. And so I think it was just the kind of the perfect illustration of Alejo's points. I think also the way that you are sharing that, you're sharing that story with authenticity and real clarity, right? So being able to take the time to connect, to share it clearly, you didn't use any jargon. When you were talking about that, you were talking about the way that you felt when you were connecting with these fire teams. So well done.
Thank you.
Extraordinary example of how to communicate clearly, tell the story, and engage with the benefits to the audience as well as the levels of listening. Yay! Great job, Eliza.
Thank you, Jenna.
excellent. I think that's a wonderful exercise and something I think we could all, do in our own way, and just take home and think through that what you walked us through there, Jenna and Eliza, and thank you. It also reminds me how important it is to celebrate. I mean, I know at least within Midwestern culture, it's hard when somebody says, "What are you proud of?" It's like I'm allowed to do that. I can be proud of myself, and really to give our space a space for that. One other reaction, and Mike, I want to ask for your reaction in a second too, Mike. But your description of level three, Jenna, that was pretty emotional for me. This idea of intuition, and it brought to mind two things in my lived experience. There was a time as a teenager I lived in a culture where I didn't speak the language for a period of until I was in the process of learning the local language, but for many months I was not able to engage verbally in that place, and over that time really became much more dependent on intuition around body language. And that was it was amazing to me what you could read in a room when you couldn't rely on the words that were being said. And that it really taught me a lot about really what you can pick up through intuition when you really lean into that part of how we communicate with each other. And I think the way that you described between level 1, level 2, and level 3, how those flow together, really helped me understand that experience in a new way. It also reminded me that after coming out of the pandemic and spending, a lot of time not in physical proximity to people and especially to strangers, going back into those spaces, large group spaces, even the first conference, going back to all of that overwhelming kind of input you get from being in a crowd of people, and how one of the things that came to mind is how, you just, how do you shut that off? Like it's kind of like all these radio stations on at once, and you're getting all of that vibe from, and that was a shock to my system coming out of the pandemic. So, but like I said, again, the way that you describe those 3 levels is a new tool for me to put that into context and to understand perhaps how I can move between those to stay comfortable and not to be overwhelmed by some of that. But thank you for sharing that. Wonderful. Mike, what are thoughts that come to mind for you? And then maybe Alejo as well. And then we're going to share polling questions. Just a reminder to the audience, there is a polling question there in the chat. So please take a minute to share your thoughts as well. But Mike, any thoughts you want to share?
Sure. Thanks. It's and listening here has made me realize, or just has reemphasized the importance of listening, and that I guess what I found myself reflecting back on is that I've really been into forests and uh, coming to terms with dynamism, diversity. Did I mention change and difference? And I spent so much time trying to understand that, and at the risk of missing that's actually a really great metaphor for us, is that healthy ecosystems depend on diversity and interaction and change, um, rather than uniformity, which where I'm getting is like, I don't need everyone to be like me or to think like me about these things. There's real strength. In fact, we have to have that diversity, and I can't attain an understanding without active listening. And now what I know is levels 2 and 3 listening, not just waiting for my turn to talk, right? Um, so I guess I just can't resist trying to tie a metaphor here to what forests teach, and how humans can benefit from that metaphor. If, our conversations about forestry would benefit from embracing difference, a willingness to change. And if you start to get a little nervous about doing so, just look at the forest. It'll recharge your sense and ability to, or at least mine, to have some the bravery and courage to take a chance on listening and allowing for difference.
Excellent. Alejo, anything you'd like to share?
Um, it's fascinating that we haven't talked about how many trees we plant, and and how long does it take for a tree to grow. And we're talking about human connection, and I think that underpins everything we're talking about today. It's just human connection, and the magic. From my perspective, the magic happens when people feel seen, gotten, and heard. And you do that through level 3 listening. When you listen, you know for us to have that magic happen, to connect that, back to what the things we were saying before, we got to understand where people are coming from. So we got to listen beyond the words. We got to go a little deeper. We got to listen with that entire body, to go there and understand where people are coming from, so we can meet them where they are. And so it's so important. And if I, back to Jena's point, if all I'm doing is just listening to me in somebody else's dialogue, it's like, oh yeah, my coffee was awesome this morning. Yeah, I wish I had another one. And as soon as we're done here, I'm gonna go get one. Then I'm not tuning in into what are those beliefs, and what are those assumptions, and what are those lenses that people use to see the same thing we're seeing, but from a different perspective. So we can meet each other and make that connection. So great.
Absolutely wonderful. So we're going to share the polling on the screen in just a second, Eliza. But Jenna, as you've heard people reflect on your exercise, I just want to give you a chance to kind of lean into what you're, go ahead, please.
Well, Mike is exactly right in terms of the power of metaphor, and it strikes me that when we listen, um, everyone's like, yeah, it's great to listen, but I don't agree, right? It is okay not to agree with the person and still validate that you heard them. So if you hear someone say something and you're like, that's crazy pants, right? Like, no. You can at least respond with, wow, uh, to give you, Katie, in your airport, thank you. Thank you for sharing, right? You don't have to validate the crazy pants thing that was just said, but you can share back. Thank you for sharing. You can, if it's possible, connect with them. I heard that you blank, right? And just repeat back. Oh, I heard you say blank. That's interesting, right? We don't have to agree, and we don't have to validate another person's opinion to allow the fact that we did listen to them. We did hear them. So I will say that. And then I will also say it's not always safe for everyone to share the same opinion. And so we have learned across the board in many of our communications that especially if you are looking at sharing a point of view, especially if you're looking at sharing a perspective, it is not the same if you are a white man as if you're a woman or as if you're a person of color. So there are different consequences across the board, and we really encourage folks to just make sure that what they're sharing when they're sharing their perspective, that they do feel safe to share it.
Absolutely. That's very true. We all are in different places and carry different identities that impact how we show up. Eliza, you ready? You want to try sharing the
Yeah.
polling input? Go ahead.
Yeah,
Awesome.
so folks should be able to see my screen. These are the responses to the polling. And if you scan that code or click the link that's been in the chat, you should be able to explore these on your own too, on your own screen instead of being subjected to my scroll here. Um, we asked people to share about misconceptions, and surprise, surprise, there is a lot of similarity in what people say. I'm struck by these you know, generated boxes up at the top here, a lot of the usual forest management, that makes sense, but bad. How many folks have shared a response that, the most common misconception they get is really negative? Or, these first two really sum up well what a lot of other people have said is that, that our relationships with forests are bad, that timber harvesting is bad, that there's this general mistrust of harvesting or any mistrust that, cutting trees could be done responsibly. And so that really struck me in looking at what folks have said here is that, you know, there's really personal reactions to people's relationships with forests. And, when we work with members of the public or people in our own communities or even our own families, that these things are really personal because they really get to deeply what people believe about how like we as a species should be interacting with other species, which is a pretty broad level of thinking. Yeah, there's a couple other things that have stood out in here too. Um, this one struck me that forest owners do not know or have any ideas. Just this, we're working with people that have a really varied beliefs about what we should be doing and what they should be doing. And so, I think that really gets to Alejo's point about listening first. Um, yeah, Katie, I'll turn it back over to you. I think we're going to have some discussion about these misconceptions, and I'm happy to keep them on the screen or take them down. Folks, again, can look at these as you wish on your own devices.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I think if you can scroll through it a little bit on the screen, but feel free in about a minute or so to take it down because, like you said, people can go to Slido and see it themselves. And I agree with kind of how you summarized. I mean, what stood out for me is a lot of these responses had to do with competing viewpoints around harvesting and management.
Yep.
So I'd love to hear, Mike, maybe start with you. I mean, and if you want to pass, just feel free to say, hey, start with somebody else. I want to reflect a little bit more. But, I think that's a common thing, just people having very different win-lose or a high amount of conflict around appropriate harvesting, good management, bad management. How do we navigate that conversation carefully? What are your thoughts, Mike?
Well, yeah, as I look through these, I think what jumps right out is that differences here, disagreement, these misconceptions that are challenging, they don't arise from opposing values. People love forests. They arise from what I'll carefully describe as or characterize as just misunderstanding. And that's why conversation matters and active conversation listening, right? It's not because people don't care. It's a distance that develops when we think we're different and that we value these things differently. I have experienced that where I've been accused of not valuing forests, which is, what did you call it, Jenna? Crazy pants? Uh, so that, I do. It's like, so, yeah, so I think that's what jumps out at me is there's so much common ground. That is, people care about forests. People know that forests and trees matter. It's just the misunderstanding of how we each come at that shared love of forests.
Yeah, Alejo, you have thoughts? Go ahead, please. And Jenna.
Yeah, I, Mike, I couldn't agree more with what you just said. I think it's just, we're talking about human connection and making sure people feel seen, gotten, understood. And, if we start a discussion with like, yeah, well, you're wrong, we're doing quite the opposite of that. And I think it's just human nature, to try to just answer first and, well, let me explain. And I think, it's just a slight mindset change, shifting from trying to win the discussion to understanding that a misconception is that you read chapters 3, 4, and 7 of the book, and I read 1, 5, and 9. And so we haven't read the same chapters together. And so a misconception is just an opportunity to provide the missing chapters for both, you and I. And so if you're a Star Wars fan, you're Yoda, you're guiding, you're not Luke Skywalker trying to, win the battle. And so, back to the things we were discussing before, just understanding where people are, just listening with intent and that level 3 listening and level 2 listening, being curious about, and humble about where people are. And I've been here 25 years. The jargon, the acronyms that we so dearly love don't really help us much in this front, when we start throwing those. And so, and to Mike's point, somewhere in there, there's a shared value that you can build from. We'd all be, I mean, the simple one is we'll all be hard pressed to find somebody that doesn't believe that they want to do the right thing. And so, we are doing the right thing. We feel we're doing the right thing. And so we're just finding what are those missing chapters in what we value being doing the right thing, that we're seeing things differently, and kind of building from there, and then using logic and emotion and making it personal and all those things. And so, but the bottom line is, starting with the perspective of, making sure people feel heard and understood and seen and gotten. That's when we open up, in coaching. That's when the best coaching happens, is that's when you open up, is when you feel, oh yeah, you're right. Yes. When you get that, yes, exactly right. That's when you go a layer deeper and deeper.
Yeah, go ahead, Jenna. Anything you wanted to add here? Please.
I think it's important to note that I am not a forester. A lot of the communication that I do is often between the science and the forester, or between the money and the project. Um, and there are a lot of misconceptions out there. I think always, if we can, getting folks on site is the most powerful experience, right? We understand that. We also understand now that we can't get everyone on site, but we have these incredible tools with video, right? With storytelling. And so thinking about uh, how we can share that shared value. One tip, if you happen to just be having a conversation with someone, I find is to be able to, again, where you're losing your listening and then you're saying, huh. So if it's harvesting is bad, I hear that you care deeply about forests, right? So you're trying to identify that value, then you share it. I do too. They are my absolute favorite thing. I've dedicated my life to them. Then you can ask, do you want more information from me? So, can I share my perspective with you on why health harvesting can be healthy and good for the forest? They can say no, right? They can say yes. So if yes, then going back then to some of the audience, some of those connections. And if they say no, you're maybe not going to win this one, right? Good. Let's just know that we both care deeply about forests, right? Yeah, I think everything that Mike and Alejo said also is just very, very strong, and knowing too that I'm not coming at it from a practitioner perspective. These are the folks that know the most about what is right and what is wrong to do with these forests.
Wonderful. Good. Well, in a minute, we're going to shift gears toward the Q&A question. So just invite the audience, please go ahead, go into that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and put in your questions, and we will walk through those in a minute. One question I want to ask before we go to that, and I'll start with you, Mike, is, I think some of this conversation's touched around this, um, but within our communications, some of what we talked about today has really been around these boundaries between, the personal values and all of the motivations that we bring to this work that are, sometimes very personal. But then also that balancing that with professional communications, the talking points of your company or the positions of your, CEO, whatever it is, or the stated positions of your agency. So, how do we balance personal and professional communications here? Where do we have permission to move those boundaries or not? How do we navigate that? And I also want to recognize, I think the speakers here, myself included today, we're very comfortable. We've been very comfortable in this conversation talking pretty emotionally about this, in terms of just really the love that we have for the forest. That's also not everybody's comfort zone. Let's not get all warm and fuzzy here. Let's stick to some facts and some decision making. So how do we navigate that in terms of just again, like we've talked about, meeting people where they are, creating a safe conversation for people, but that personal, that professional, that emotional, that rational, all of those ends of the spectrum that we navigate. Any thoughts there, Mike?
Yes, and this is a big admission time here for me. So this idea of there's this boundary between our personal views and professional roles, um, particularly for maybe strikes me that the folks I've met over my career, like in conservation, people have roles, but they also have deep personal commitment to the work. And that can set up a tension because, as Katie set up, that you don't always necessarily feel like you have that safety or permission. If yours is stronger than so maybe the party line, or if it in fact differs. So when I first thought about this question, I thought, what are you talking about? Like I've never felt that way. And Katie and her awesomeness said, well, Mike, that's because you've had the privilege. And she's absolutely right. And this was really powerful for me actually to experience and to realize that I couldn't, even when I shared that even when I didn't necessarily have authority, when I was early in my career, I still felt like I could say what I wanted to say from my heart about these topics. So that's how much privilege I've enjoyed, is that even when I didn't have permission, I felt like I had permission, or I didn't feel like I didn't. Right? Am I making sense? So I'm not exactly the right person for this, but maybe in that way that I am coming to this, later, realizing that, we do bring these deeply held personal values, and sometimes they can be, I think many of us have experienced where we're sitting at a dinner table or maybe a canoe, and we're thinking, perhaps it's even on social media now. I have thoughts about this, strong ones, but I'm not really sure I'm safe to share them or that I have permission to share them, if you will. And what does that mean? How do we, culturally and professionally, to share our views on forestry or conservation issues? Um, how can we navigate that realm thoughtfully? When we have that tension. So I guess I'd love to punt this over to Alejo and Jenna and say, what advice would you offer to someone early in their career, or perhaps who are kind of traditionally marginalized, and about how to navigate this, and what are the tools and tactics to get to a place? Because if we're listening to everything that's come before in this conversation, we need those disparate voices and opinions and perspectives and lived experience to be part of this conversation as we move ahead. So, if it's fair, I would love to put you two under that one.
Um, I think we do, but it's a yes, but you know, I'm answering the question: do we have permission to share our personal views? And um, it's a yes, but because whether we like it or not, I think we are all confined by the policies and the boundaries of the different organizations we work with or for. So whether you're in government or academia or a private company, there are policies and there are boundaries that are set that we gotta navigate through. I also think that as a sector, we need to empower more and facilitate more dialogue as opposed to suppressing it. And I had a personal situation experience, about a decade ago, where the company I was working with at the time was having a controversial issue in the community where we lived, and so a lot of people were in that dire situation that they were seeing the company, being, bad mouth in social media, or in the supermarket or at church, and had a hard time knowing what to do about it. Because everyone felt that it was unfair, but no one wanted to get scolded over, crossing the line. And so I think what we learned there, it has two aspects. So one is for leaders and one is for employees. I think for leaders, I think leaders have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to embrace the reality that these discussions are happening. That our employees are having discussions in their dining table, at church, at supermarket, whether it's a controversial issue or it's not. And so, and more likely than not, they're getting the harder questions. You're probably not getting tough questions. They are. And so the suggestion is, the invitation is to embrace that and just, talk to them, see where they are, what do they need, what questions are they getting, and empower them. How do you empower? I think the reflection is, how do you empower them to answer those questions? What tools do they need? Do they need training? Do they need talking points? Do they need a discussion? What is it that they need? We did that. We learned that the hard way, but we did that. We put multiple town halls and talking points and Q&As and created the space for that discussion. People felt much, much better at the end of the day. And so if you're a leader, I think it'll help you because your employees are going to feel, seen, gotten, and heard. It will help all of us because, they will help us build this story and and fill those missing chapters. And whether we like it or not, our employees are the Amazon reviews of forestry. So they are the ones that people want to talk to because they are the ones that are being trusted by their peers, by their friends, their family members. And so now, if you're on the employee side, I think you have a great opportunity. And so I think the question is not about whether you have permission or you not, or you don't. The question is what impact do you want to have in those discussions? And embracing, and being proactive about that, and taking it on, and and asking for help, and asking for those talking points, and asking for, what is the company line on this? What is the boundary? The reality is that I think in this industry, where we live in small communities, and where while we cover a lot of ground, the number of people that work in the industry is fairly small. It's very hard to separate your title from your name. I think your title follows you everywhere you go. And so I think that's the opportunity. You're trusted. You are the Amazon review, so you might as well embrace that and talk. But always, 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 this is gonna sound like a TV commercial. Check with your company. Make sure you are within the boundaries of your company. And of course, this goes without saying. Don't do anything stupid. Don't engage in a battle in social media. That's not the place to have that discussion. But your story is real, and it matters. And whether you are on the field planting trees, you are with timber marketing, talking to a mill about the trees you're going to sell them, or you're in accounting, just counting low tickets. It doesn't matter where you are. Your story is real, and it matters, and that's what builds trust. So just embrace that. And the goal is not to be the spokesperson of the company. The goal is to be a credible human voice, which you are, and have a good story to back that up, mindful of your organizational boundaries.
Fantastic. I think that there's a lot there. People authenticity, people's perspectives lends authenticity. If you share it honestly, that's really powerful because it can actually add to the institutional mission. Right? When you just talk as like the institution, it kind of turns people off or they just sort of glaze over. But actual human like sharing changes the whole thing, right? So it sounds to me like so then how do we balance that? And Jen, I'm going to toss it back to you with a little bit more because thinking more about if you'd share what's with this, your perspective on it, but also I'm fascinated by this. Like as a manager, I used to be here. Well, we want to make people feel heard, and of course, but is that the same as listening, or is like I want them to be heard, and I think that requires listening, not just feel like they were heard. So maybe that's a bit tricky, but I have a sense, Jenna, you're up to it. Please.
Yeah. Um, this is a very delicate space. It's also a very real space. And I think, I guess I have two easy tips. One is practice. It's impossible to do this without practice. And so that requires whether it is someone on your team that you trust who's really good at this, but it absolutely requires leadership and the folks who are out there in the field to come together and genuinely have these conversations. And they're tough only really the first time, right? So if we can normalize saying, hey, I'm really struggling with answering this question, we are getting it. And instead of having a defensive response, we practice, well, let's role play. What are the actual values that are coming out? What does the community care about? And then what are the benefits? And can we say that in a way that still feels authentic, right? And I so often in the professional sector, we have like this professional speech, and then we have the actual thing that is happening or the words that are being said in the conversation. So being able to have a buddy, someone that you trust, or if you need a coach going out to someone and saying, I'm having a really hard time advocating on behalf of my team. I can advocate on behalf of the organization, no problem, but I don't know how to say these things to my leaders, either about this or if it's in public, I don't know how to say these things. So find somebody that you trust, practice having the hard conversations, and then get to a place where you at least can say the bare minimum that feels true to you. And my favorite tip on this is just to use the phrase right now. Right now, I'm feeling blank. Right now, it looks like our organization is headed in this direction. Right now, I don't have an answer. As soon as I know more, I'll get back to you. Right? So, using some bridge phrases that can help you give you time to think or give your organization time to develop a response, I think is really powerful. And then the other tip that I found is just to acknowledge that you are in a spot where perhaps they're asking you for the collective point of view and you might have a personal point of view. So, wow, your question really lends itself to blank, to the value of blank. Um, I have a personal opinion and one on behalf of the group or the organization. Which do you want to hear? Right? Are you authorized to give that opinion? But perhaps there is a difference. So our organization firmly believes, we believe blank. My perspective is a little bit different because of my lived experience. I believe blank. So if you can bridge both, absolutely, that's possible. But practice having that conversation. And if you're empowered as a manager to bring in your teams to these conversations, have them listen to you answer that hard conversation. What is it like to be able to answer on behalf of the organization and to share your your personal perspective?
The picture that came to mind, Jenna, when you were talking, my 16-year-old boy was, I think, 5 or 4 at the time, and the entrance to our house had a 2-inch step. And the first time he crossed it, he measured it for like 5 minutes, and he looked at it, and then he made the step. And you could see him smiling when he did that step, and then he did it like 50 times, after that. And so, to your point about it's just practice. It's not rocket science, but it's something that gets easier as you practice it. And it may feel daunting the first time you want to do that first step, and even if it's 2 inches. But it gets easier as you practice more.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great visual image, Alejo. I'll carry that one. Great. Well, Mike, you want to take us through some Q&A?
Sure. I think I might be glitching. I'm not seeing the Q&A. Are there questions that we have from?
I'll get us started then with the one that I can see on my screen, and then Mike, you have some of the other ones that we talked about. Good.
Yep.
So we'll get through the first one, and then I'll toss it back to you, Mike.
Sounds good.
Good. So Jenna, this goes back. This is an early question that came in related to your opening story with Texas and the ocelots, and the questions around reacting to how you shared that ranchers were interested and excited about protecting ocelots on their property. The attendee lives in the West, where there's frequent conflicts between ranchers around wolves, bears, wildlife in the West. So are there lessons from the experience you saw with the ocelots in Texas that could be applied, in your opinion, to conversations in the West around wolves and bears currently?
Sure, maybe. Although I am also not a wood or a bear, a wolf or a bear expert. I'm also not a rancher or a farmer. Um, what we found with Ocelot was that the ranchers and the farmers knew how to best run their lands. The feds did not. And so when we can show some autonomy and some trust to the individuals who understand the best practices for land management, and we can build some trust with the individuals, the biologists knew the most about the cats, right? And so the biologists weren't trying to tell the ranchers how to ranch their land, and the ranchers weren't trying to tell the biologists what was dangerous or not dangerous for the cats. So I guess part of it is just understanding that there is some autonomy and expertise on all of the sides. And then the second was almost always if we could find a farmer or a rancher who was experimenting with something, had done something well, and we could invite them, they would host a dinner and they would be like, hey, everybody. all of the surrounding landowners, come on over, come to my home, come to my ranch, we'll cook, we will have a dinner side chat, and we'll talk about what we see. And it was never a convinced kind of thing. It was a shared conversation, always around food. And folks had their own ideas, and then they could share about what might be best. So that's what worked. And that was, I hope, what will continue to work and brings out not just the human aspect, but fingers are crossed that it really does result in better practices than for the critters that we care so deeply about that are using these lands.
No, that is resonates so much. Yeah, that is really actionable and meaningful in terms of the things that it's just the things we know that work, to create a space to have the critical conversations. And it made me think too, Jenna, that a lot of our conversation here today, we've talked about trust, but part of what I heard and what you were saying was also around respect, and so that the way that trust and respect interact when you're engaged in communication. So, Mike, you ready? Take us through a couple more questions before we wrap up. Just a few more minutes, and then we'll have Maria give some final announcement. But go ahead, Mike.
Sure. A few others, drilling in a bit, what are specific strategies for developing communication skills as an individual or within organizations? I mean, how does this vary depending on different organizational policies? Anyone?
I'm just gonna piggyback on what Jena was saying before. I think what worked for me before is to have somebody to practice with, and and then two is to find my own words. Sometimes you can get caught up on a company line on a very specific way of saying things, and but in a very technical sector, and I think finding your own words, finding your own groove, it's key, because back to the authenticity that Mike was talking about before, that shows. And so if you can be more authentic and more yourself, I think you're more relaxed and you're a much better communicator. And to my prior point around finding a body to talk to, it could be a colleague. I was making a presentation about superpowers, not too long ago, and I had my son listen to it. My 14-year-old son listened to it and gave me really good feedback. And it felt safe to me to start with him, and then I opened it up to others. But so you don't need to go to the CEO of the company. You need to go to a peer. Just find that that place where you have the human connection, where you're going to get valuable insights and valuable information with somebody that trusts you and that you trust.
Thank you. The risk given the time, I'm going to jump to this here and talk about this hits home a little bit as a recovering leader myself. The risks of leaders being out of touch with these kind of challenging conversations that are occurring. What is the role of, and also recognizing, I have a strong belief that you have leaders, traditional leaders, and you also have leaders who lead from below or within. So leadership across an organization or an entity. What is the role of leaders in being aware of these tough questions, and how does a leader support and address these?
If you're leading an organization right now and you don't think that these conversations are happening, you should not be leading your organization. It has changed. It is changing. It's changing so much faster than I think any of us have even in this moment. I just yesterday came from a conference where it was, how do we use AI for good, right? So these conversations are absolutely accelerating. And if you stick your head in the mud and you think that you can just avoid this, I think it's a huge disservice to forests and certainly to your team. So big champion of admitting that these are hard conversations, but also just finding the budgets, finding the tools, finding the partners that you have to invest in practicing these conversations. the more that you can practice them, the more normal they become, and that authenticity and that transparency will follow.
Thanks, Jenna. Thanks, Alejo. I have to say, what a dream team here. Thank you both very much. Katie, over to you.
Excellent. I agree. Dream team. A wonderful conversation. So thank you. Thank you, Alejo, Jenna, Mike, Eliza, Maria, Amy, our panel as guest speakers, and to the Dovetail team for everything it took to bring this together for this event. And Maria, you'll have our closing comments. Thank you, Maria.
I do. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you all so much for, this amazing conversation. I feel like I definitely have some tools in my back pocket now to communicate effectively and empathetically. So thank you. I am going to add a few resources to the chat on communication. And I do want to say that we are a nonprofit and we strive to keep these webinars accessible to everyone by not requiring a registration fee. So if you do find value in our work and are in a position to support us, we invite you to consider making a donation to Dovetail. Every contribution, big or small, helps us continue offering these resources like our reports and like our webinars. You can find that link in the chat. And I am going to be following up with an email to all of the participants that contains the recording to this session, a feedback survey for this webinar. So feel free to reply back to that email if you have other questions or, any other feedback. And we look forward to having you at our next webinar, Walk in the Woods, on June 12th. Bye. Thank you so much, everyone.